Tyranny can only enter our country from our own great men. Benjamin Rush knew the real danger, even at the height of the War for Independence. The founders understood that history is littered with power-hungry rulers who use deception. Sometimes they'll use false flags. They might exploit a real crisis, or provoke one too. And when all else fails, they'll just pretend to love liberty. But it's all just a scam to expand their power and control. So on this episode, it's the real Trojan horse used all throughout history. But first of all, before getting to that, welcome. And thank you for joining me here on the path to liberty. My name is Michael Bolden with the 10th Amendment Center, and this is the show for Wednesday, November 12th, 2025. We've all heard the term Trojan Horse. It comes from ancient Greek mythology and the Trojan War, where soldiers supposedly hid inside a giant wooden horse to gain access to the city and burn it down. The founders and the old revolutionaries, well, they understood that this was much more than just mythology. It was a real political strategy used all throughout history for power and control. For example, in his very famous 1766 sermon celebrating the repeal of the Stamp Act, the Reverend Jonathan Mayhew, well, he called the entire internal taxation scheme of the British a deceptive tactic, a snare broken. The Stamp Act to him was a perfect Trojan horse because it was sold to the colonists under the guise of something good. After the very terrible 7 Years' War, it was there supposedly to pay for their national security, something we all hear all the time today as well. But the real goal was to pay for the beginnings of tyranny and establish a permanent standing army, the destruction of liberty from within. Here's how he put it. And the golden temptation, it is said, took with too many for a while, a Pandora's box or Trojan horse indeed. And the previous fall, in his widely read and very influential broadside, urging non-compliance with the Stamp Act, the penman of the American Revolution, John Dickinson, he urged the people to not fall for this trap. And they listened to him. It worked. He said, if you quietly bend your necks to that yoke, you prove yourselves ready to receive any bondage to which your lords and masters shall please to subject you. But back to Mayhew. He understood that even after the repeal, this single victory, this was not the end of the story, not even close. He continued his sermon with a warning to the people to not let their guard down, really a repeat of a quote, the desperate warning from the priest in Virgil's epic. Well, it is insanity to think that this is over. I can't read the original text, but here's the general translation in English. O wretched citizens, what so great a madness is this? Do you believe the enemies have gone away? Or do you think that any gifts of the Greeks lack treachery? Now, this strategy of fake gifts and other deception to gain power and control, this wasn't new, of course, for Mayhew and the revolutionaries. They knew that history is filled with tyrants using such pretexts, what we might call false flags today, in order to expand their power. The master playbook comes right from Machiavelli in The Prince, which is first written, I think, in 1513. It was published a couple of decades after that. Now, he documented how in Athens, this is 6th century BC, Pisistratus, if I can pronounce that, he actually used maybe one of the earliest examples of a false flag. He literally staged an attack on himself to establish a standing army and eventually seize total power and control. Machiavelli put it like this: as to the employment of deceit and cunning, I give the following instances. Pisistratus, after the victory which he had gained over the people of Megara, was greatly beloved by the people of Athens. One morning he went forth from his house wounded, and charged the nobility with having attacked him from jealousy, and demanded permission to keep a guard of armed followers for his protection, which was accorded him. Now, in Cato's letters number 76, Thomas Gordon explained that the fatal danger wasn't the final army. In fact, the establishment of the Guard was just a tiny force of 50 men, armed with nothing more than, I think, just wooden clubs. Here's how Gordon put it. Pisistratus, having procured from the city of Athens 50 fellows armed only with cudgels for the security of his person from false and lying dangers, improved them into an army, and by it enslaved that free state. And Machiavelli understood this. And if Machiavelli's saying it, it really holds a lot of punch. One tiny step is all that an ambitious tyrant ever needs. He said this first step enabled him easily to attain such power that he soon after made himself tyrant of Athens. In the early years of the American Revolution, this is 1767, John Dickinson gave us a powerful example to show how rulers will also exploit a real crisis. They don't always need to fake these things. Sometimes bad stuff happens, but then they take that bad stuff. They never let a crisis go to waste because they then establish a single precedent to give them more power, and that single precedent eventually destroys freedom completely. Dickinson put it like this: Spain was once free. Their Cortes resembled our parliaments. No money could be raised on the subject without their consent. One of their kings, having received a grant from them to maintain a war against the Moors, now this is going to sound familiar, desired that if the sum which they had given should not be sufficient, he might be allowed for that emergency only to raise more money without assembling the Cortes. It's always for that one emergency, isn't it? But it never, ever ends there. Now, Dickinson explained that the good guys actually tried to stop this. They fought against this, but unfortunately they lost. And that loss set the stage for almost unlimited power in the future. I guess really unlimited power is how it went down. He said the request was violently opposed by the best and wisest men in the assembly. It was, however, complied with by the votes of a majority. And this single concession was a precedent for other concessions of the like kind, until at last the crown obtained a general power of raising money in cases of necessity. Now, necessity, that is a real broad term that you don't want government to be able to define. So it started out with the king could only raise money. They could only raise money on the subject with the consent of the representatives of the people. Then you had a war, and that war was an emergency. So the king said, this one emergency only, let me get away with breaking the rules, doing an end run around this. And instead of just telling them, no, we have to hold the line, they allowed him that. That set a precedent to expand that, and went beyond emergency into just the necessity of the tyrant. And of course, they never recovered from that fatal mistake, and freedom was obliterated. Dickinson said, from that period, the Cortes ceased to be useful. The people ceased to be free. Now, the ancients, they knew this game very, very well. Sometimes all a tyrant needs to do is literally just frighten the people. And Thomas Gordon, in the works of Sallust, he told the story of Dionysius. This was the tyrant of Syracuse, who used 150 years after Pisistratus the exact same strategy, but he didn't need to attack himself. He only needed to fearmonger. Here's how Gordon put it. He told them, and his argument was enough to gain their belief. Don't trust these people when they tell you stuff, is the warning there. That he went in hourly peril of his life and begged them to appoint him a guard. They readily granted him what he wanted, and he readily took what they had thus helped him to, even the prerogative of putting chains upon them all. Being well versed in this history, it's no surprise that James Madison understood that government will always use fear of foreign danger, real or fake, to attack freedom at home. In a 1798 letter to Thomas Jefferson, this is during the run-up to passage of the Alien and Sedition Acts, He said, perhaps it is a universal truth that the loss of liberty at home is to be charged to provisions against danger, real or pretended, from abroad. Now, this is not from your modern day tinfoil hat wearing conspiracy theorist. This is James freaking Madison, the father of the Constitution. He was a student of history, and he understood that people who want to expand their power will find a way to do it. They will either exploit a real foreign crisis and get the job done, and if they can't find one, they will literally make one up. Now, it isn't just foreign danger. As John Trenchard pointed out in Cato's Letters number 17, there's also a domestic version of this play: manufacture or provoke a crisis at home and end up with the same result. He said, they will, by all practicable means of oppression, provoke the people to disaffection, and then make that disaffection an argument for new oppression, for not trusting them any further, and for keeping up troops, and in fine, for depriving them of liberties and privileges to which they are entitled by their birth and the laws of their country. Now, this isn't just theory either. Nero, possibly the most infamous tyrant in history, he literally and personally pioneered the tactic. Here from the works of Tacitus, translated by Thomas Gordon. Nero, who disguised in the habit of a slave, went roaming about the streets and scoured the public inns and stews, followed by a set of companions who seized as prey whatever stood exposed to sale and assaulted whomsoever they met. So they went around in disguise, masked men, attacking people, stealing stuff, and getting away with it. And it caused all kinds of crazy violence. And all these violence from Tacitus were committed upon the people so unapprised of the author that he himself was once wounded and bore the scar in his face. And that's when it really got violent, because once people learned that it was Nero, who's going to fight back? I mean, you can't. Even if Nero attacks you, you have no right of self-defense. And so that led to a really crazy situation where there was all kinds of violence and disorder, and it was so severe it was like the city was under siege. Back to Tacitus, the name of Nero, being once used to warrant licentiousness, was falsely assumed as a cloak by others, and many with their own separate gangs boldly practiced the same excesses, copycats all over the place. So that such were the nightly combustions at Rome, as if the city had been stormed and the inhabitants taken captive. So what does Nero do? Well, he uses this. He provoked the people into violence, and then he uses that violence as an excuse, as a justification to deport people he didn't like and expand military power and rule. Back to Tacitus, these tumults went on till the people being heated and rent into dissensions, and commotions still more terrible apprehended. No other remedy. This is the last thing we can do. No other remedy was found but that of driving the players out of Italy and of recalling the soldiers to guard the theater. The lesson is clear to the founding generation. It should be clear to everyone. If it happened over there, if it happened back then, it can happen anywhere. It can happen here, and it can happen now. That's the same warning that the anti-federalist writer Cato, in his 5th essay, that's what he told us in 1787. He said, "Is it because you do not believe that an American can be a tyrant? If this be the case, you rest on a weak basis. Americans are like other men in similar situations." The founding generation, they were students of human nature. They were students of history. Cato continued, "Your posterity will find that great power connected with ambition, luxury, and flattery will as readily produce a Caesar, Caligula, Nero, and Domitian in America as did the same causes in the Roman Empire." Now, if you happen to be thinking about, I need to get myself some new reading, you are in luck, because available for pre-order today is our new book, The Anti-Federalists Were Right. Martin, Mason, Gary, Cato, and the Pennsylvania dissenters, the case against ratification. You can find that one if you want to hear more about the Anti-Federalist case over at 10thamendmentcenter.com/anti-federalist. It's all spelled out. 10thamendmentcenter.com/anti-federalist. Now, going back to the works of Tacitus, that brings us to what is possibly the most dangerous kind of Trojan horse, the most dangerous kind of false flag, the ruler who pretends to love liberty, but uses that fake love of liberty to gain power and then destroys liberty once they wield power. And for that, we have the Imperator Caesar Augustus, the adopted son of Julius Caesar. He first pretended to love and support and defend liberty. And here from the works of Tacitus, Augustus paid great court to the people. The very name that covered his usurpation was a compliment to them. He affected to call it the power of the tribuneship, an office first created purely for their protection and as the strongest effort and barrier of popular liberty. What Augustus did was actually pretty slick. First, he resigned the consulship to make it seem like he was returning power to the people, but he got something in exchange. The Senate gave him the power of the office of the tribune. This was an office that the people understood as a bulwark against tyranny. Now, he wasn't legally authorized to hold the office, so they just gave him the power of it anyways. And then he used that power under the guise of protecting national security to seize total power and control. Here's how Tacitus put it. It was for their sake and security he pretended to assume this power, though by it he acted as absolutely as if he had called it the dictatorial power. Such energy there is in words. The office itself was erected as a bulwark against tyranny. And by the name of it, tyranny is now supported. The founders and the old revolutionaries, they were very well versed in this history of Augustus. They also were very well aware of their own 17th century Augustus, Oliver Cromwell. Cromwell was really supposed to be where he was sold as the champion of English liberty, but he sold instead a military dictatorship to the people under the guise of protecting the people from the other party. Here's how Thomas Gordon put it in A Discourse on Standing Armies. The partisans of Oliver Cromwell, when he was meditating tyranny over the three nations, gave out that it was the only expedient to balance factions and to keep out Charles Stuart. Hey, these Stuart people are really, really dangerous. You got to let me have this power to keep them away. The other side is awful. But as Gordon pointed out, the fix ended up being way worse than the disease. And so they did worse things to keep him out than he could have done if they had let him in. And this should be the ultimate lesson from all this history. The wolf always comes dressed as a sheep. Benjamin Rush in 1778, this is the height of the American Revolution, the War for Independence. He knew this very clearly. He said, tyranny can now enter our country only in the shape of a Whig. All our jealousy should be of ourselves. All our fears should be of our great men, whether in civil or military authority. And that's the lesson the founders and old revolutionaries knew so well, but Americans today have long, long forgotten. And that's a big part of the reason why we work so hard every single day to reach and teach more and more people with these essential history lessons, these essential foundational principles from the founders, from the old revolutionaries and the great thinkers that they read and learned from. And absolutely nothing helps us do this work more than the financial faith and support of our members. If you got a couple of bucks of that quickly devaluing, dirty government fiat, please consider throwing it our way over at 10thamendmentcenter.com/members. It's all spelled out, 10thamendmentcenter.com/members. Our membership program starts out at just $2 a month. We also have annual 5-year, and lifetime options. I'd be very grateful for any consideration you can give to joining us as a member today. Now, if you don't want to become a member, that's totally cool. I'm glad you're still here. Now, if you do want to support us financially, you can still do that separately with a one-time gift, or if you already are a member, thank you very much. I know some people ask, where else can I pitch in? I want to make sure you have the URL for that. It's 10thamendmentcenter.com/donate. Again, no pressure at all, but I'd be very grateful for your support today. Now, you can also do a bunch of free and easy peasy things to help us spread the word, primarily by taking actions on the various video or podcast platforms that you watch or listen on, because that triggers the algorithm and tells them to show us to more people. One of the top things you can do is watch time percentage on YouTube. If it's a 20-minute video, you watch it 20 minutes, that's 100%. And the algo thinks it's pretty good. Now, if you watch it 40 minutes, that's 200%, so way better. I think you get the idea on that. You can also hit the like button, subscribe, get notifications. Leaving comments in the archive is a good one. Reviews on Apple Podcasts or any of the podcast platforms, sharing links, etc., etc. I really appreciate your support, whether it's financial, otherwise, or all the above. Thank you. Thank you so much for being here. I hope you enjoyed this episode. I hope it was interesting, maybe a little entertaining here and there, but more important than anything, I hope it made you think, and I hope you learned something. Again, I really appreciate you being here. Hope you have a great day, and I'll see you next time here on the Path to Liberty.